Banning the boycotters. Israel slams the door shut on anyone who supported a boycott against the country or its illegal settlements. Also on today's program, courting votes while facing court, how France's presidential frontrunner has fallen from grace and what it means for the French election. And in Picture This, a feast fit for an elephant. Activists honor Thailand's national animal as they fight to end its exploitation. I'm Andrea Sankey, and this is the Newsmakers. Well, if you want to visit Israel, be careful what you say about it. The country has started refusing entry to foreigners who've backed a boycott of Israeli products. Parliament passed the law last week, which bars supporters of the movement known as BDS. It stands for Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions, three nonviolent strategies designed to put economic pressure on Israel to end the occupation of Palestinian territory. Now, the Israeli government says the law is a way for the country to defend itself against people it says wish to harm Israel. But for critics, it sends the message that you're not welcome unless you agree with Israeli policy. They argue that academics and politicians could be caught up in the ban and that it will only end up isolating Israel. Our newsmaker today is Israel's boycott ban, as we ask if the government is defending its interests or stifling peaceful political activism.
Fighting a boycott with a ban. Israel has passed a new law that bars entry to foreigners who have publicly supported the international boycott, divestment and sanctions movement. The BDS movement uses economic and political pressure to push for equal rights for Palestinians and to end the occupation of the West Bank and East Jerusalem. The new law bans entry and residency rights to anyone who knowingly issues a public call for boycotting Israel that has a reasonable possibility of leading to the imposition of a boycott in any area under its control. That includes settlements in the occupied West Bank, which are considered illegal under international law. BDS supporters have compared their movement to the non-violent campaigns against apartheid in South Africa and say they're fighting human rights abuses. But to the Israeli government, BDS is anti-Semitic and what it describes as a new front in the war against Israel. Israel's government has increasingly been on the offensive in its battle with the BDS movement. Last year, it committed around $25 million to challenge what it sees as a strategic threat. And the government's been further emboldened by US President Donald Trump. Last month in Washington, he gave a warm welcome to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He's also appointed a pro-Israel hardliner as ambassador to the country, and Trump has speculated about moving the US embassy to Jerusalem. But critics to this new law say it discriminates the same way as Trump's travel ban on 6 mainly Muslim countries. They call it a worrying crackdown on free speech and non-violent dissent. There's also concern the law doesn't make the distinction between those who advocate boycotts of Israel and those who just support boycotting products made in the illegal settlements, which includes many Jewish Americans. It all adds up to a jarring redefinition of enemies that could see Israel isolating itself from its critics and supporters too. Yvette McCullough, The Newsmakers.
To discuss this further, I'm joined now by Kwara Kekana from Johannesburg. She is the spokeswoman of the International Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions Movement in South Africa. And from the Israeli settlement Eli in the West Bank, anti-BDS activist Gedaliah Bloom. Thanks both so much for joining us. Gedaliah, let me start with you. You see this ban as acceptable and even necessary. Why?
To be honest with you, I think that whether you agree with the ban or not, that, people need to respect sovereign countries' right to admit or not to admit whom they please, and whichever levels whichever levels that they would want. For instance, I'll tell you what. I mean, we're not talking about this today, but Saudi Arabia has less women drivers than Israeli women who drive tanks. Yet if I was going to get a visa into Saudi Arabia, I wouldn't be able to walk down the street to protest for women's rights And this is not breaking news right now. And so when I see that Israeli sovereignty is being challenged, I say, let's be consistent with the world. You may not agree with the ban, but it's certainly Israel's right to set its own standards about who comes in and who does not, especially when we're talking about foreign nationals, which have no rights as an Israeli citizen. We're not talking about Israeli citizens. It's not taking away the freedom of speech or the freedom to protest of Israeli citizens. We live in a free democracy. But on the other hand, we do have a right to deny anybody from coming into our country to be a subversive,
but Gedaliah, to draw a comparison between the democracy that Israel calls itself and the state that is Saudi Arabia, why would you want to make that comparison?
Why? Because I think that if you want to make a point, you have to go to the other extreme. And there's not much more extreme than you could get than the laws against women in Saudi Arabia.
So do you think Israel is at an extreme?
No, actually, what I'm trying to point out is the complete hypocrisy that this is even a subject. As we're learning about, these new fake news stories that are going on, that, if it's not this, it's going to be something else about Israel. And Israel is under a microscope, and that, anytime it may be perceived as being a misstep, that the whole world jumps on Israel and does not respect Israel's sovereignty.
Let me get to Kawado. Why do you think the BDS ban should persevere?
Firstly, I'm struggling to hear the gentleman on the other side. But I think insofar as this travel ban is concerned, I think as the boycott, divestment and sanctions movement in South Africa, to us this is indicative of a regime in panic. And this will further isolate Israel. I mean, the boycott, divestment and sanctions movement is a non-violent, rights-based approach movement. And you're seeing different governments in different parts of the world coming out and affirming people's right to do BDS. The Norwegian government, the Dutch pension fund, the Dutch government rather, the Swedish government as well, saying, you know what, people have a right to do BDS. People have a right to advocate for human rights. So when you as a regime want to then advocate or implement a travel ban, you're effectively saying to people, we want to ban human rights and human rights defenders, which is absolutely absurd. But what's also troubling, I think, for example, in the last couple of months in South Africa, those who form part of the World Council of Churches program from the Economical Accompaniment Program have been denied entry into Palestine. So Israel is an occupying power. At the same time, is denying people into Israel, but it's also denying people that want to do genuine work in Palestine as well. So again, I mean, this will further, as far as we're concerned, further isolate Israel. And we've seen what isolation campaigns can do. We've seen that in the South African case, for example. The sort of panic by Israel as a regime is very similar to, for example, in 1985, when the apartheid government in South Africa, the Pretoria regime, implemented what was called a state of emergency. Basically, I mean, at that point in time, the national liberation movements, the United Democratic, the civil social movements at the time really said, you know what, we must make apartheid unworkable and ungovernable. Effectively, you are saying to people, when you call for a travel ban, and I mean, it's not even possible. Think about it this way. I mean, in terms of trying to ban boycott, divestment, and sanctions as a campaign itself, I mean, fine, you want to ban people insofar as movement is concerned. But insofar as the campaign is concerned, it's growing at a supersonic speed. So you can't ban human rights activities in South Africa, in Botswana, in Zambia, in Tanzania, in the different parts of the world. You can't ban the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. It's a mass-based grassroots movement. So what is deeply concerning, I think, that, people that want to do work as well. So Israel's an occupying power, is restricting people from accessing entry into Palestine as well, which is deeply concerning.
Gedaliah, go ahead. I can see you had something to respond to there.
Yeah, as a very well-spoken spokesperson, as she is, I think it's important to note that this narrative that we have between apartheid South Africa and Israel is complete falsity. And I think that what she's doing right now is trying to gain support and, of course, to do a fundraiser, because if you actually got into the actual details of what she was saying, you would realize how completely insignificant what she's saying is, and ideally also, and I'll tell you what, the BDS movement, although she'll tell you that it's growing and it's becoming much more of a global power. The fact is that they're the most irrelevant organization against Israel. I mean, they're putting 5-cent stickers on tomatoes in South Africa and London, while just today, Intel just bought Mobileye for $15 billion. Every month, Israeli tech gets $100 million in foreign investment. And she's saying that this movement.
Let me ask you then, why is Israel calling so much attention to this movement if you think it is basically worthless?
Okay, on an economic level, it's completely worthless, okay? Because again, 5-cent stickers on a tomato is not going to bring down the Israeli government, especially when we're selling companies for $15 billion. On the other hand, and it's very important to make clear, is that the BDS movement's strategy is to destroy Israel. They call the occupation, which started in 1947, which is just, I guess, a coincidence, but that's when the modern state of Israel was reestablished. Okay, now, so, you know, war didn't work against Israel, terror didn't work against Israel, and now they're doing BDS. When they say it's non-violent, that their strategy is violent. Their strategy only started, the BDS movement started in 2005 after the end of the, soon after the second intifada became a complete failure to them. So they moved on to a different, they're using different tactics. So when they say it's a non-violent, they may be non-violent in their protests, but what they're trying to do is violent. They're trying to uproot and destroy the state of Israel as it exists today. And by comparing Israel to apartheid Africa is how they're going to get this sympathy and empathy from people around the world who just don't know the truth. So what they're doing is they're going after people who haven't the slightest clue that 22% of that Israeli citizens are Arab. We have Arabs, I heard the BDS movement.
Okay, let me just ask Quara on that point. Quara, why do you think the world isn't responding the same to your calls for action via the BDS as it did to those fighting against apartheid South Africa?
I'm not sure what he quite means by the world is not responding the same. But I think insofar as the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement is concerned internationally, for example, I think in the last 5 years or so, I think that the boycott itself is growing at a supersonic speed. And this is affirmation by the Israeli government itself. For example, they've established a ministry just to focus on the BDS question. They've also now shifted the responsibility for fighting BDS from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to the Ministry of Strategic Affairs. I think it's something that we've never seen in terms of fighting apartheid policies in South Africa. We've never seen a ministry quite established for fighting the isolation campaigns. And in the last couple of years, we're really seeing a lot of victories coming out internationally. And what's ironically, I think, in terms of I think it's a question we must also pose that in terms of the travel ban, will Israel, I think it's something to observe, will Israel also be willing to also ban young Jewish comrades on the ground that are advancing the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement? For example, you have organizations in South Africa called South African Jews for a Free Palestine that are anti the occupation, that speak very critically of the Israeli government. Are they banning people into Israel-Palestine, certain kinds of people only? Or is it everyone that speaks critically and also supports the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement generally? But I think also insofar as in the last couple of years, some of the major victories that have come out from the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, you've got the Norwegian pension fund, the Swedish pension fund, some among the largest pension funds in the world divesting from Israel. You've got Bill Gates, one of the richest peoples in the world, dumping stock from Group 4 Security Company, which is directly involved in the torture center, the prison systems as well, in the Israeli prison, the torture centers, and detention facilities that house Palestinian political prisoners. In South Africa, for example, you've got an increasing academic boycott campaign. Just 2 years ago, over 200 academics in this country made a pledge that they will not be supporting the Israeli regime or its associated institutions in any form within the academic sphere as well. Okay. You've got 5 university councils as well, adopting full academic and cultural boycotts of Israel as well. You've got mainstream churches such as the Presbyterian Church, the United Church of Christ in the US, with over 1 million members also saying, adopting the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. So I don't quite understand what he means by, it's not being supported at the rate at which the isolation campaigns is. But also, it's him acknowledging that the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement is gaining serious traction.
Okay, unfortunately, Quara, I'm going to have to let you have the last word because we are completely out of time for this debate. But I'd like to thank you both so much, Gedaliah and Quara Kekana, for joining us on the Newsmakers. Well, it's a crucial week for France's former prime minister who hopes to become the next president. François Fillon is fighting for his political life as he battles a growing financial scandal that involves everything from expensive suits to accusations of family members paid for fake jobs. On Wednesday, he'll be questioned by investigators and may face criminal charges. Now, Fillon dismisses it all as a politically motivated campaign to derail his chances of winning the election. So can he come back from this fall from grace? Shoaib Hassan has this report on how things unraveled for the former frontrunner.
Many in France thought it was a done deal. Come late May and this man would be ruling the country. But things have not gone as planned for François Fillon. It began after revelations that Fillon's wife Penelope had received close to $1 million of public money for work he hadn't done. It was disaster for a candidate who had based his campaign on a fight against corruption, and Fillon's initial response didn't help.
From the very beginning, I have not been treated like anyone else before the law. The calendar is totally linked to the political calendar. I am going to be questioned 2 days, that's 48 hours, before the declarations of candidacy for the presidential elections close.
The result was as expected: public outrage and protests. The troubles of the French economy and the growing sense of alienation have heightened the anger.
All the privileges of our politicians, they share it among their close relations and everything is going fine for them. There's no work in France, not for the young and not for the old, so it's unbearable.
We cannot believe someone who has lied so much, who has given advantages to his wife, his children, his family.
That stalled Fillon's campaign, and that means others, like far-right candidate Marine Le Pen and centrist contender Emmanuel Macron, have surged ahead. Former Economy Minister Macron was seen as an outsider, but he's benefited from Fillon's troubles and an uninspiring list of socialist candidates. The current nominee from the ruling French party is Benoît Hamon, and he still trails Fillon, who has fallen to third place in the polls. That's why many socialist leaders are now moving to endorse their former cabinet colleague Macron. Some polls currently say he will win with over 60% of the vote. And then there's the darling of the far right, Marine Le Pen. She's riding the wave of anti-immigrant sentiment and economic anger against the ruling elite that's sweeping most of Europe. Le Pen trails Macron in the latest polls, but her supporters say the data is flawed and that she remains very much in the race. That's as political pundits remain wary of predicting a clear winner, especially after the Brexit vote and the victory of Donald Trump. That's also why Fillon feels he still has a strong chance of pulling off an unexpected victory, and many of his supporters are sticking by him.
I am angry with the system, the judges, his supporters who have given up on him. So we have to support him, and I believe in that man and his program.
Fillon says he believes his campaign best harnesses this anger with its promise of conservatism and hope, and can still carry him to victory. And the pundits are not ready to rule him out just yet. Shoaib Hassan, the Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Paris is Edouard Lesarf. He is the global head of political and opinion research for Kantar Public. Thank you so much for joining us. Fillon says he is a victim of a political assassination. If you think he is, tell us who would target him and why.
Well, he claims to be that kind of victim, and actually when you look at the way the opinion did vary between about 1 month ago and right now, actually yes, he was kind of a victim in polls, but claiming being a victim means that he's directly attacking the media and the judicial system, saying that they are both attacking him. Actually, what happened is that there were a few things in the media that were rapidly, quite intensively relayed by all the media, where he is taken as someone who did a few things that might not be for the time being considered as from a judicial point of view, real problems, but from the opinion point of view, the pain is here. He has been hurt quite badly in polls, in the opinion, because of course, if ever justice says, well, there was no judicial problem with that, nevertheless, he has, of course, been impacted in the opinion, and there were something like 10% of voters that withdrew from his voting potential. If you take the difference about a month and a half ago, it was like around 30%, it's now like 20%. But claiming as a victim is also a way for him to say, I'm the kind, and that's a word he used a few days ago, I'm the new rebel of the system.
What Fillon is accused of doing, hiring family members aside,
well, actually,
this issue of taking loans from friends that he didn't declare, interest-free loans, paying for suits in cash, is that really different from what many politicians in France do anyway? Does it deserve this much attention in the media?
Well, you know, we are currently in a presidential political campaign, so whatever you can say around that kind of things, and you might consider that, of course, that kind of things might have happened to other politicians, but now the moment is so intense that anything becomes a new story. And of course, it is considered as very important also because François Fillon claimed in the first part of his campaign that he was Mr. Clean in a way. He was the one that would not be part of that system. And now, new allegations about what he might have done comes in perfect conflict with his former position. That's why the noise around that is so big and has such an impact.
From a PR perspective and as an observer yourself, do you think Fillon and his wife as well have handled this well? The fact that she hasn't spoken a word since this scandal broke, is that the right way to come at this as far as the French public is concerned?
Well, actually, she did spoke. She kept silent for about a month or so, and then, probably based on advice that they got, they decided that she should talk. And she had an interview in a famous Sunday newspaper called Le Journal du Dimanche, where she said a few things about her position. Well, I'm not a PR guy. I'm just looking at what the impact on the opinion. And right now, it didn't help to protect François Fillon in a way. But you can also consider that being around 20% in voting intentions for the time being is not that bad, considering the firmness, I would say, of the attacks he faced. So from a pure opinion point of view, he has some kind of a bedrock, something like 1 potential voters out of 5, 20%, which is quite solid, but it's a starting point. It's not sufficient to be at the second round. He's now in third position behind Marine Le Pen and behind Emmanuel Macron. So being third is certainly not sufficient to be qualified for the second round and then to be president.
That's what this really boils down to. Regardless of the scandals he's been hit with, he may or may not have made it to the second round anyway. And as for the second round, it still looks like both Macron and Fillon are ahead of who's expected to be the second person in the second round race, Marine Le Pen. Let me ask you, going forward in the election, unrelated really to François Fillon, are you expecting to see a repeat then of the 2002 election between Jacques Chirac and Marine Le Pen's father, Jean-Marie, in which the French public suddenly came out and rallied against this extremist right candidate? Or has so much changed in 15 years since that election? Has the public mentality changed and swung to this nationalist sentiment?
Well, it did change, of course, and the situation will be obviously quite different from the 2002 presidential election you're mentioning. Right now, in voting intentions, Marine Le Pen is ahead of everyone, with something like 26%, sometimes in some polls, 27% in voting intentions. She's leading the polls right now. And Emmanuel Macron is second, and François Fillon is third for the time being. So everyone has in mind, and if you ask the French population, they think about 3/4 of the French population are quite sure that she will be qualified for the second round, but only 20% of them think that she will win in the end. So there are chances, and not slight chances. The most predictable scenario right now, if you look at voting intentions, of course we are still 40 days ahead of the election, but right now it looks like Marine Le Pen is going to be qualified for the second round, and probably for the time being, Emmanuel Macron would be second.
Okay, we'll see if the polls can be trusted as well. Edouard Le Cerf, thank you so much for joining us from Paris on the Newsmakers. In today's Picture This, they say every dog has its day. Well, in Thailand, that's true for elephants, too. Take a look. That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers. From me, Andrea Sankey, and the whole team here in Istanbul. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.